Okay, I heard a beep. Does that mean I'm on the air? 10-9-8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1. Is there anything happening? Supreme Court extends day and wage hour enforcement. House Democrats vote new era on chairman. 10-9-8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1.
This is the first week of the 1975 session. The first week of the 1975 session has been a period of organization and shakedown for both houses. Standing committees, parentheses, list included, parentheses, have all been organized, and some of them have started hearings on pre-filed bills. It has also been a period of reorientation for this reporter. We will keep you informed on the important issues that affect agriculture, and especially those issues spelled out in our policy program. Rodney Dieter has been employed as a legislative intern to assist me and President Radcliffe during the 1975 session. Rod, whose home is near Faulkton, is a junior government major at University of South Dakota. College credit is given to students who participate in this intern program. With Rod's help, we'll be able to cover the 1975 session in more detail. An error of anticipation prevails around the Capitol while awaiting the introduction of the tax reform bill, a bill that will include the repeal of all personal property tax and replace it with a personal and corporate net income tax based on federal taxable income. This is one of the simplest methods of computing a state income tax and one of the least costly. We have been informed that the final draft will be completed early in the second week of the session. This weekly newsletter will help keep you informed on this vital issue. As soon as possible, inform your legislators of your opinion regarding this measure. One of the early pre-filed bills is Senate Bill 10, the Critical Area Land Use Bill. This bill, if passed, would provide procedures whereby land areas would be designated for specific use, such as wetland and stream bank, wildlife habitat, agricultural land, water supply areas, and so forth. Any area designated as such would have to be of statewide concern or statewide economic interest. Also concerning the issue of land use, an erosion and sedimentation bill will be introduced. The bill provides that any land disturbing activities before any land disturbing activity is started, a plan to control erosion and sedimentation must be approved by the Soil Conservation District. However, agriculture and forestry are exempt from listing a plan, but could be found in violation of the provisions of the law. Other bills passed, House Bill 501 to clarify the county zoning law. House Bill 502 provides for an arbitration board to resolve city-county joint zoning conflicts. Senate Bill 1 would regulate election campaign spending and create a state election ethics committee. As in the past, feel free to contact me at any time. Plan to attend Farmers Union Legislative Day, February 19th. Leroy Hardy, your Farmers Union lobbyist. Now I'll give you the standing committees. First for the Senate. And in all these committees, the first named person is the chairman, the second named person is vice chairman. For Agriculture Committee, Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator LaRue, Leddy, Flight, Testerman, Rip, Roberts, and Shannard. Appropriations Committee, Schreier, Sutton, Krull, Mahan, Mayer, Michelson, Bibby, Grahams, Lamont, Poppin, and Rip. Senate Commerce, Krull, Kelly, Billion, Jackson, Harding, Ken Jones, and Peploe. Education, Hall, Michelson, Kelly, Mayer, Anderson, Hoffman, Songstad. Health and Welfare, Mayer, Jackson, Kelm, Reedy, Lamont, Songstad, and Tjeerdsma. I'll spell that for you. T-J-E-E-R-D-S-M-A. Intergovernmental Cooperation, Lieutenant Governor Harvey Waldman, Schreier, Testerman, Roberts, and Tjeerdsma. Investigating, Michelson, Billion, Songstad. Judiciary, Candaris, O'Connor, Kurt Jones, Kelm, Michelson, Bibby, Ken Jones, McClure, Poppin. Legislative Procedure, Sutton, Lieutenant Governor Harvey Waldman, Flight, Hoffman, Shannard. Local Government, Reedy, LaRue, Leddy, O'Connor, Anderson, Peploe, and Tjeerdsma. Natural Resources, Mahan, Testerman, Kelm, Sutton, Dunn, Grahams, Shannard. State Affairs, O'Connor, Candaris, Hall, Kurt Jones, Kelly, Dunn, Harding, McClure, and Peploe. Taxation, Kurt Jones, Hall, Billion, LaRue, Reedy, Dunn, Hoffman, Ken Jones, and Roberts. Transportation, Jackson, Flight, Leddy, Schreier, Anderson, Harding, McClure. Okay, now the House, members of the House committees. Agriculture, William Jensen, Wood, Bones, Lackness, R. Miller, W. Miller, Rickenback, Berg, Curran, Freerichs, that's F-R-E-R-I-C-H-S, Herseth, R. Johnson, and Swenson. Appropriations, Stan Johnson, C. Anderson, Gross, Kaufman, Stoik, Barnes, Danicus, Endries, Robinolt, and Weiss. Commerce, Melhoff, Edlin, Clark, Clements, Hogan, R. Miller, Tisdale, Burns, Turner, Lovell, L. Miller, Cheddar, and Walter. Education, Cleveland, Weber, Bones, Clement, Hams, Stoffern, Warkenthin, that's W-A-R-K-E-N-T-H-I-E-N, Beaver, Drake, Hochschild, Hunking, Kerner, and Raddick. Health and Welfare, Nepstad, Hogan, Littow, Mortimer, Simpson, Weber, Beaver, Hochschild, Kerner, Lyons, Olson, and Raddick. Intergovernmental Cooperation, Kaufman, Gross, Stoik, Cheddar, and Walter. Investigating, C, Edlund, and Kopecky. Judiciary, Barnett, Michelson, Mickelson, Edlund, Hoagland, Kessling, Melhalf, R. Miller, Burns, McFarland, Minch, Mickel, Mickel, L. Miller, and Walter. Legislative Procedure, Anderson, Hanson, Barnett, Danicus, and L. Miller. Local Government, Wood, Groseth, Ham, Cleveland, Littau, Littau, Millet, Nepstad, Drake, Freericks, Kopecky, Lyons, Raddick, Sievertson. Natural Resources, Mortimer, Millet, Gelhaus, Gellhaus, I. Jensen, Rickenbach, Simpson, Tisdale, Crouch, Curran, Herseth, Hunking, Knudsen, and Michael or Mickle. State Affairs, W. Miller, Kessling, Groseth, Halling, Michelson, Millet, Mortimer, Ellingson, Koth, Kopecky, Cheddar, Sievertson, Swenson. Taxation, Kessling, Walter Miller, Gelhaus, Hanson, I. Jensen, Mickelson, Staffern, Ellingson, Knudsen, McFarland, Minch, Olson, Sievertson. Transportation, Hanson, Halling, Clark, W. Jensen, Lackness, Simpson, Warkenthien, Berg, Crouch, Herseth, R. Johnson, Koth, and Lovell. That's the Senate. That's the House committee members.
Did bring $6 million relief for the elderly this year. We upped our aid to secondary and elementary education, which is tax relief indirectly to you, in the sense that you aren't always asked for an additional higher property tax to do the same thing, to pick up the cost of inflation in education or whatever. We picked that up by an additional $11 million. And that very nearly doubled it for all that they'd ever given from past years from state government. So, you know, I like what Owen said a bit ago. He talked about integrity. And, you know, I just can't promise to the people of our state a variety of relief that can't be delivered by anything other than some kind of reform, and recognizing its importance. You know, I'm the only governor in the United States that can say to you today that we've not imposed new taxes for the operation of state government. We've had a healthy increase in the growth side and new millions that have come to our coffers in state government. But all other states have had that same growth, and none of them could run their operations with no new taxes. I'm proud of that. I think we've put the state government and its house in order. It's going to be put in better order if I'm allowed to continue in this office. With the 3.5 years experience that I have, I think I can make that work to the benefit of the South Dakota taxpayers. But I'm going back in 1975 to a legislature, and I'll continue to talk to them about equalizing our means of providing services from the governmental level and the taxes we impose to get it done. I'm going to continue talking about that equity, and I think that for the 4 years I've been there's been at least some kind of an education with the public so that it's going to be somewhat easier and we can move on with that question. But I won't promise relief indirectly or at election time just to garner votes.
Thank you, Governor Kneip. John, would you care to respond to that?
I certainly would. Is this on? Can you hear it? Can you hear it now?
Could I get you to forward?
Thank you. I'm very happy to respond to that. You know, it's an interesting thing to listen to what the governor just said. $9 million has been added to relief at the local level, and you know where that came from? Revenue sharing. Think about that one a minute. 3 years in a row, he promised you tax reform, and what did you get? More promises the next year, and then at the close of the third year, he went to the legislature and said, since you fellows won't cooperate with me, I'm not going to do anything next year. Now that he's thinking about a third term, he says, I'm going to do it next year. It's an interesting approach when he says he wants to approach you in all sincerity. I've contended ever since I got in this campaign that this problem must be solved in the interim between sessions by a cooperative effort between the administrative branch and the legislative branch, as I told you in my opening remark. That I will do. And with Eddie Clay as a lieutenant governor, a man who's had 8 years on the Appropriations Committee of the House, I'm satisfied we can do it because he knows the operation of state government from the budget standpoint and can work closely with the leadership in the legislature. And I swear that I will not come before the legislature at the end of the third term and wash my hands of a problem if I think I'm going to seek re-election. I have proposed that the sales tax on food, the market basket items on food, be eliminated. And I'm satisfied that can be accomplished, and I think that will give you just a little additional chance to get at the dollars that are going into the market basket and from the consumer standpoint, and create some additional demand for food without the opposition that is building up in the mind of the consumer as to the great cost of that food by the elimination of those 4 cents on each dollar's worth of food purchased over a 4-year period. I don't think that's a false promise. I think it's a pledge to you that can be lived up to and a shot in the arm to heal some of the wounds between the consumer and the producer as we look at agriculture and the role it must follow. I oppose violently the statement made by our governor that you cannot do it, that the federal government must do it. I believe sincerely that if our state government will operate in connection with the livestock industry as it has in connection with the tourist industry, we can do a selling job for agriculture instead of saying only the federal government can do it. I'm sick and tired of hearing the only thing that can help the farmer is the federal government. I've seen an organization formed in this state. I've seen an organization formed in this state in the last year of farmers and ranchers that are doing the job. And I've seen the state government sit back there and wring their hands and say, go ahead, fellas, go ahead, we'll be back of you. But the further you go, the further back they are. Why can't we work together? I don't see any answer that says we can't. And I'm sick and tired of hearing that only the federal government can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. A question now for Congressman Frank Denholm. President Ford has said that he will deregulate the controls on natural gas and let free enterprise adjust the price of gas. What will be the effect on the fertilizer industry, home heating, and grain drying?
Well, the question calls for a speculative answer. To answer it directly, I think it will increase. I guess I could yield the rest of my time, but further than that, I can't yield almost 3 minutes. I'd like to respond to some other things. This is another situation where big business and big government appear to be working together. We have seen this through the energy crisis all the way. It's quite different than it was when we had a president by the name of John F. Kennedy who said to Mr. Blau, who was then president of the U.S. Steel Company, go home and get your books and bring them in here and show me that you need an increase. No, we don't have that kind of leadership in this country today. We have Mr. Simon, goes around jawboning up prices, did an excellent job. Mr. Sawhill to try to scare the patriots of America to slow down, go home, turn down the heat, shut off the lights, and get into bed. That's the solution that we have today. This kind of leadership is negative. It'll lead us only one way, and that's backwards. I think on the contrary, and I want to just respond just a bit because I know it's of interest to you people, my opponent is attacking the Agricultural Committee of the House. Now, I can't be responsible for all the Republicans and my other Democratic colleagues in that committee. I have one vote out of 435. I think I have a voting record at 100% for agriculture as measured by the Farmers Union Index. I certainly have tried to do the best that I can with one vote. I've never been wholly satisfied with everything that's happened on my committee, and I suppose that's true in Pierre and other committees in the Congress of the United States. But it's essential that I won't run against the committee, the one single committee of Congress that is destined to help the farmers the most. We talk about Venezuela. Let me say to you that Jack Anderson is a personal acquaintance of mine, personal friend. He and I have appeared on the Ogronsky show together. We've been on the same platforms. He called me and he said, I've got to try to find something on you. I got to do this on every member of the Congress before Election Day. And I said, Jack, I don't know of anything. If you can find something, go ahead and write it. Well, he came back the second day and he said, the only thing I know of is that trip you took to Venezuela. I said, what about that? Well, he said, it looks like it was paid for by the Venezuela government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I made news releases on that August of 1973 when I left. It was carried by Leo Hardig, who has been belching out last night on the news about me going there and reading Jack Anderson's column again. Leo Hardig carried the same news a year ago. Do you remember then? I made the news release then, told him where I was going, and it wasn't costing the taxpayers 10 cents of the United States. Another interesting thing about it was it was approved by the State Department, whom my opponent was legal counsel for at that time. Another interesting thing about it was that the Republican counsel for our committee said it was okay. The fact is, it wasn't until 1974 that some of us thought that maybe these kind of trips weren't okay, and my distinguished colleague, Jack Kemp from Buffalo, New York, asked for a legal opinion. It's the first time in 200 years that we got a legal opinion as to whether that kind of a trip could be accepted by members of Congress. At that time, GAO, the Government Accounting Office attorneys, said that it would be considered a gift. The fact is, I didn't get any gift out of it. The luxurious hotel that I stayed in was a second-rate Holiday Inn here in South Dakota. The equivalent there, too. Thank you. My time is up.
Thank you, Congressman Denholm. Rather a far-reaching answer. Mr. Pressler?
Yes, I'll be glad to get going. I would not want to see natural gas deregulated because I think it would mean just enormous increases in the prices of fertilizer and other chemicals, and well, the whole list of things that you said there includes the lobby that is closer to the House Agricultural Committee than family farmers are. And I have put forth an anti-inflation plan which includes a 10% cut in pay for congressmen, but it also includes rollbacks in certain prices with government standby authority to enforce. And tomorrow at the Ford rally, some of you will hear about my speech in which I'm going to ask President Ford to carry a big stick and speak softly, to have a Teddy Roosevelt type administration. That's what we need in Washington. But in terms of those industries that would be affected by a natural gas rollback, and the ones that Leo Hardig listed, the fertilizer industry, they're so close to the House Agricultural Committee that I believe that we need to look into that whole matter. Now, my opponent sort of brushed off what I said, but he is the only member of the South Dakota congressional delegation who has not made a financial disclosure, or the only challenger. Every other candidate for the Senate and the House of Representatives has made a full financial disclosure. He has not. I think that the House Agricultural Committee, particularly the ones that Jack Anderson has been writing about, and the principal one among them has been Congressman Frank Denholm. Now, he said he couldn't be responsible for all the members of the committee, but he can certainly be responsible for himself. And I would think that congressmen can read the Constitution, which says that members of the government are not supposed to accept emoluments or gifts from foreign governments. I would hope he could read the 1966 Foreign Gifts Act, which says that members of the government are not to accept any gift above $50. And that certainly, we've all heard about some of the problems Mrs. Nixon and Mrs. Humphrey and others have had in having to give back gifts. But we just deserve a better standard of representation in Washington. When I see my dad and his neighbors and what they've gone through to make a living and raise their families, we need reform in the committee that, I mean, those fellows, Poge and the whole group of them, they're always off junketing, and I don't see much coming out of the House Agricultural Committee. They hold hearings 6 months after the Agricultural Department has a wheat sale or after it does some other thing regarding farm policy. And they're much publicized hearings. But I want to see the House and the Congress to start to make policy, to start to really grab the ball back, and to start to be leaders in agriculture. I'd also like to touch briefly, in talking about natural gas and fertilizer, those two industries are subsidized at rates which are 3 and 4 times the amount agriculture is subsidized at. And also, they are protected from foreign competition at a much higher rate than American farmers are. When I first began running for Congress, I got a letter from a vice president of an airlines who said, "My fine young man, good young candidate. I hope that you're for really getting some free competition in agriculture." And I wrote him back and I said, "I certainly am for that. But the airlines industry gets subsidized, according to Department of Commerce figures, at almost 4 times the rate the agricultural industry does. So let's have a free economy with fairness." And certainly those industries that Mr. Hardig listed would be in the group that are most cozy with the House Agricultural Committee, which I think that the agricultural establishment in Washington, the House Agricultural Committee and the Department of Agriculture, are closer to agribusiness than they are to agriculture. And that's why I want Congressman Denholm to remove his distinction as the only challenger or the only incumbent in South Dakota who's refused to make any financial disclosure. And that's why I want him to tell us about the
Mr.
gifts.
Pressler,
Yes.
Excuse me, sir. Your time has expired. It is true that with so much on these gentlemen's minds, and I know they want to get their message across to you, it is difficult to keep it inside of 3 minutes. I just feel so fortunate I'm not a candidate for political office. This is addressed to Mr. Jack Weiland. Would you comment, please, on the halting of the grain sale to Russia and its implications for the American agricultural industry?
Yes, of course, I support grain sales or any commodity sales into the foreign market. Now, this could have an adverse effect on some of the grain crops in this country, and of course, I see just nothing but a senseless policy when we stop the sale of export commodities and then we allow America to become a dumping ground for beef and dairy products. It makes no sense. And it looks to me simply like the administration is catering, on the one hand, to the large businesses who make just as much money off of beef imports as they do from local beef sales. I think that a food reserve that is controlled by the Agriculture Department, not used to beat down prices, small enough to lend stability to agriculture, would allow commodities to move from this country in international trade very, very freely, taking advantage of every single good market that is available.
Thank you. Owen?
Yes, thank you, Leo. I think Congressman Abner would agree with most of what Mr. Weiland has said, except perhaps for the food reserve. I think it's important to remember that although the candidates represented here would represent South Dakota, which is the most agricultural state in the nation, the administration only has one constituency, and that constituency is 95% consumers and not farmers. And I think it's unfortunate when the meat import law that Senator McGovern referred to was passed back in 1964 that it did not contain an amendment that Senator Ruska from Nebraska offered that would have made the trigger point for imports at which no more imports would be allowed in was not made mandatory. That trigger point was made discretionary so that the president could decide whether he wanted to implement import restrictions or not. And I think it's pretty obvious that the administration has to take into account the will and the needs of the 95% of the country that are not farmers. And I think farmers are going to continue to come out on the short end of federal activities as long as we continue to give more and more control of agriculture to the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. It's getting close to 12 o'clock, and we do wish to terminate this conversation prior to that time. I know that many of you, depending upon the schedule of these gentlemen here, will have questions for them in private afterward, and I'm certain that they'll be more than happy to answer those questions if their schedule today will permit them to do so. We have time, I think, for just one more question, and in light of the fact that this is one of such deep concern, apparently to all South Dakotans, I would like each of the panelists to respond to it briefly as they possibly can, because the question was reflected here in many of those questions which you sent back to the panel behind the curtain, and that is the view that each of these candidates has regarding land use planning. And may we begin on the far side with Mr. Weiland and just work straight across the table. This is your own view, and please try to avoid making a rebuttal to something that your opponent may or may not have said.
Okay, thank you very much, Leo. I think the one concept that we have to be concerned with in any land use planning, and that is that there must be sufficient local input going up toward the top where the final decisions are going to be made. Now, this is true with whether it's land use or whether it's resources under the ground. For example, I was one of the first political candidates to raise questions relative to the Madison Water Formation and the coal slurry pipeline out in Rapid City. Now, what's happening in Wyoming is that they're going to build a coal slurry pipeline to move coal to Virginia. They're going to be tapping out of that Madison Water Formation that's going to affect every single resident, rancher, people in town in the West River area. Yet there isn't presently any laws on the books to prevent one state from raiding the resources of another. Not only that, but in that same pipeline there's 81 other applications. Now, these problems many times cross state lines. There has to be some federal guidelines, but the thing that we must be extremely careful of, and that is that we get proper input from the local to the next highest subdivision.
Thank you very much. I think that we're up against a future land use planning program. It's not new. We've had it for years. I was corporate counsel to 3 different cities before I was elected to Congress, and I served on the planning commissions. I served on the National Planning Commission of the National Municipal League of Officers. We've had land planning use, or land use planning, I should say, in the cities for a long while, commercial and residential, industrial, etc. When you expand it to the country, I think the most important thing is that we must preserve the right of privacy, the property rights of the people. I think that if people have a wash that contaminates clear water and clean water streams, we have to look at that. We've recognized it in the agricultural programs under our soil conservation and land and water conservation programs for years. We need to start where the furrow begins. We need to practice and continue to practice very good land and water conservation practices, and that will be a real foundation to land use planning in the future. I was very disappointed when the administration under the leadership of President Nixon terminated those land and water conservation programs. I was one of the first to introduce legislation to reinstate them. We have them reinstated now, and I think that we have to continue with them. But I do think that if you see America as it is and see Pennsylvania and you see some of these states where they've really got problems, that we're going to have to try to encourage the states and local governments to do some land use planning in the future. The bill that was up this year was not satisfactory to me because it did not recognize the right of privacy of the fee simple title owners of land, and we did not have an input enough from the local people. Until we get that, until you people participate in it, get the kind of land use planning you want, I'll have some difficulty of supporting it.
Let me point out a couple of things quickly in looking to land use legislation, because we had land use legislation before the last session of the South Dakota legislature. First of all, there's a great argument waging across the state whether or not you should even have it. I want you to know that in my opinion, it's coming. The best way you can deal with that kind of problem is to face it and write into it every bit of local control you can. Now, I feel also that if we don't, we're going to see another instance where the federal government will move in and do it for you. Maybe the best example of why you should have something like what I call critical areas legislation is to look to the flood of 1972 and to the change in land use, for example, throughout the city of Rapid City in a host of areas. Under the legislation proposed last year before the South Dakota legislature, the designation of critical areas began with the local level. It was reviewed. Now this was a proposal now. This is something that's not law, but it was a proposal before the legislature. The designation came from the local area. It was reviewed by a state review board. But before anything in the state could be determined to be of critical area nature or land use in that sense, it had to be so designated by the South Dakota legislature. Now, if you think about that, that legislature is representative of the people in the state. And and some people call that state control. I don't. I think you're going to have a partnership between state and local governments working that out. And I think it can happen. And I think when it is written, that knowing the South Dakota legislature, knowing myself, you will have every bit of local control that you can possibly write into it. But the problem is there. It's coming, and the best way we can solve it is to deal directly with it.
Well, I agree all the way with what Governor Kneip has just said. We need to understand what land use planning means, because the big coal corporations and the oil interests and others that want to get hold of private property in our state and elsewhere without any kind of restrictions in the interest of the property owner and in the interest of the public have distributed a lot of false propaganda about the land use concept. Land use means exactly that. It means for the people of a state to sit down and through their elected representatives to work out certain protections that will protect your ranch or your farm or your part of the state against interests that might otherwise damage the beauty and the value of that land. No one with an attractive farm or ranch wants somebody to open a rendering plant next door. No one wants strip mining to take place without proper safeguards. The purpose of the land use concept is to offer some federal assistance to those states that decide on their own that they want to proceed with a land use plan. That bill passed the Senate, and as Frank Denholm has said, died in the House of Representatives. But the Senate bill as it passed, which is the bill that I support, is not a bill that forces land use controls on any state. It simply says, if you wish to proceed with the development of a land use plan to protect the property owners of your state against unwise industrial development, against the kind of thing that Jack Weiland talked about on the slurry pipeline, strip mining, the corporate takeover of agriculture. If you want protections against exploitation of that kind, and your state develops a plan that is acceptable to that legislature, the federal government will help pay part of the cost. That's the kind of a land use plan that I favor. I think it's coming. I think it's in the interest of every property owner in this state.
Thank you, Senator McGovern. Ladies and gentlemen, this program will be over very shortly, and there are a couple of announcements that your own officials would like to make to you. And please, we beg of you, would you just remain quiet until the remaining 4 gentlemen have had the opportunity to express their views about this very important concept for everyone in the United States. Leo?
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, all down the line down there, and this is not a rebuttal, I just don't understand it. I keep hearing everyone say, it's coming, but yet in surveys taken in the state, the people don't want it. Who are our representatives that are saying it's coming? Why are we being forced into that position? I made a very straightforward statement on this earlier. Land use planning, I feel that should be left up to the individual counties to make their own decision on how you want to use your land. Washington, D.C., I don't think is capable of deciding and does not have the right to tell you how to use your land. If you don't want a rendering plant next to you, as my opponent has said, then the county has that option. They should make that decision. The bill that was supported by my opponent that died in the House, yes, it did give the states the option to belong or not to belong. However, the initial bill that my opponent supported said, states, you write a plan, or we'll take your highway funds and penalize you through water treatment funds and so on. The amendments that made it defeated that did not include that in there. However, he did not support those amendments. I just am a complete opposite end of the spectrum, and I just want you to know where both of us stand. I feel you have the right. He feels Washington, D.C. has the right.
I think we have an excellent example of controls that can be placed on strip mining by what's been done by Basin Electric up in North Dakota, as they have put the land back into the use in which it was being used prior to the mining. I think these are regulatory measures that can be made a part of any development. I was just a little bit surprised to hear the incumbent governor's comments relative to the control of this land use. It reminds me of an old Norwegian we used to have at home. He used to say, your action speaks you loud, I can't hear your words. In his executive order, he stripped the State Conservation Board of their authority to make decisions that control the local soil conservation districts. And yet he says he wants local control of land use. My hearing aid has either been turned down or we're just not communicating. But the bill that was submitted in the last session of the legislature came from one of his appointed officials after the interim committees of the legislature had studied this and said, we don't have enough ammunition, we don't have enough facts, we don't know what we want to do, we're not going to submit a bill this year. Talk to any member of the legislature. They came in and all of a sudden, wham, one morning here's a bill. After the interim study committee had said we don't have enough information, yet he tells you today, after stripping the State Conservation Board of their authority to hire and fire their own secretary and their own authority to make the rules and regulations under which the soil conservation districts operate, that he wants local control. I don't understand. I submit to you that if I'm elected, one of the first executive orders issued will give back to that board the autonomy they formerly enjoyed, because they have asked your governor to do just that. And to date, to the best of my knowledge, he has not done so. To me, that's a most dramatic example of local control of the things that are vital to you as farmers and ranchers. And you must, through the people you appoint to those districts, retain that control through your state board. Thank you.
Well, I believe that we do need a national coordinated effort in some aspects of land use planning, particularly regarding watersheds and river bottoms. For example, here in South Dakota, we've got to be very concerned about the James River if the North Dakotans if the Canadians will no longer take the water from the Souris River, if it's diverted into the James River, because the salinity level in that water is so high that it might well affect the river bottom of the farmland of the James River. So basically, I think that the term land use planning has come to be highly emotional. A lot of farmers think of the fact that if there's land use planning, they'll be told that they have to contour, they don't have to contour. And I would certainly be opposed to that. But I do think in terms of watersheds, in terms of interstate problems such as rivers and river bottoms, that we've got to think in terms of a national coordinated effort.
Well, I think everyone obviously agrees that the control for land use planning must be maintained at the local level. But I know that Jim would feel that that point cannot be too highly emphasized. I think we've got to recognize that different areas of the country have different needs. Urban areas badly need some more organized land use planning, but all too often the needs of rural America are subjugated to the needs of urban America. I think it was interesting to note in the final days of the House Interior Committee activities on H.R. 10294, the Land Use Planning Act in the House, they held hearings after the committee had completed markup on the bill, and this is most unusual.